welcome our viewers from across the globe, and the global TV is setting up new trends. We talked to the Director General of Russian International Affairs Council few days back, and that the very next day he was approached by BBC television in London, and BBC interviewed Andrei Kortunov, the Director General of Russian International Affairs Council. That's another story. Today we have with us a very renowned author of Swimming Through Volga, acclaimed military officer who have served on both sides of earth, Honorable Peter B Zwack. And we are going to talk to him about current situation on Ukrainian border, the meetings going on between US administration, Russian officials, and representatives of various governments. The second segment will be focused on China. Sir, the world knows what is happening on Ukrainian border. 2 days back, I was talking to Russian International Affairs Council's Director General. He has a different perspective to tell to the world. He says the news which is going out of Russia is not true. Russia is not in aggressive mode. He compared Ukrainian situation. He said, when I asked about India and Pakistan and Russia and Ukraine, he said that India and Pakistan situation is quite different to what Russia and Ukraine. He said, as far as civilization is concerned, Russia and Ukraine are quite similar. What does it mean? Does it mean that Russia's aggressiveness on Ukrainian border is something which should be considered as civilizational clash, or there is some other meaning behind it? You are an expert. You have been in Russia. You have written 2 books on Russia. So please explain it for our international viewers.
Thank you, Professor, for bringing me on. Yeah, we're in a really dangerous situation. And I am concerned that, and maybe it's a little bit the same with India, Pakistan, but you would know 1,000 times better. There's a personal aspect of the relationship between the Russian Federation and Ukraine that just stokes the feelings, and there's something very visceral and personal about this that I'm feeling, especially from the Russia side. And you're right, it isn't a clash of civilizations in that while the Ukrainians are distinctly different, they have been also in history often interwoven with the Russians, both historically and by family. So it's personal as well. And as we know very well, and you do too, when it gets personal, it gets potentially, it gets even harder to state your positions, convince the other side, and then be able to back down, which is what we desperately need right now, because what is happening along the Russian-Ukrainian border is dangerous. A lot of instability there, and it is ripe for an accident, an incident, or provocation. And we've read about that. You get a provocation if Russia does want to go, and I don't think Russia wants a war, but it wants its way. Again, a lot of baggage here that goes way back, but also back when we talked last time to the 30th anniversary now of the breakup of the Soviet Union, of which Ukraine was one of 15 republics and broke away. And while they have their links to Russia, are independent, and the world recognizes them as independent and recognizes the right to sovereignty and territorial integrity and aspirations, and Russia signed off on it. as late as 1994. But here we are. Russia's glowing. It is throwing its intimidating. The whole NATO issue is up, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, of which I'm a big advocate. I believe that NATO and Russia can peacefully and positively coexist, but somehow NATO has become such a demon in Russian perspective that it all makes this more dangerous now. Last thing on NATO, when we talk about it, and Russia portrays it as an aggressive bloc. All right, remember that NATO is made up now of 30 nations that, yes, it has enlarged over the years. These are nations that are voluntary. They want to be members of this alliance, and it is a defensive alliance. And nobody has any offensive, military, conventional desire to advance like the Germans did, the Nazis did in 1941, toward Moscow through Ukraine, which is what part of the debate I believe on NATO is. I believe the United States and Russia have a lot in common if we get past the baggage, which is why I stay involved in dialogues. I fundamentally like the Russians on a human and cultural basis, though I have major issues right now with the regime that I believe is pushing Russia and Europe, and by extension, possibly the world, into a diplomatic cul-de-sac where it is hard to back out of. And what do? Do they then double down and raise the stakes, more military posturing worldwide, and then more possible incidents in Europe? Or do they take a broad view? We've made our points, and we and Europe have listened, and there will be a written response to the Russian questions. We all heard that. But the core values of NATO, my United States, are non-negotiable, and that is the right to nations to have their own foreign policy. NATO, which is a defensive alliance, has its open door philosophically there. That doesn't mean countries are going to come into NATO. And this is part of its Article 10 in the NATO Charter. But we have to back off, meaning that Russia and the West have got to find a way. It's too darn dangerous. Otherwise, I'm glad that we're having the diplomacy and dialogues. We have to box our way out of this mutually, collectively, because there are bigger problems in the world. And the US and Russia, and NATO and Russia, culturally, and if you will, just shouldn't be part of that. All right, so that's just sort of a broad overview, and I'll go where you want.
I too hope so, that the tension diffuses, but it does not seem to be like falling in place. You know, there have been more than a couple round of talks between Secretary Blinken and Sergei Lavrov. Yesterday, they met, and when they met and came out of that press conference, they said that the discussion was very frank. This is a diplomatic war, but as far as the conclusion of this meeting was concerned, they did not move anywhere from there. There is still, sorry, there is still deadlock. Secretary Blinken is talking to Japanese Prime Minister, Canadian Prime Minister. So what we can expect in coming few days?
It's almost a confrontation. And this is something that the West United States and if you will, Greater Europe. And oh, by the way, Western Russia is part of Greater Europe. This doesn't have to be. And what makes this over the top, almost crazy, is that the Russians, in laying out their positions, have so muscularly demonstrated and pushed and intimidated with its military. And that is coercive. That is something that autocratic nations do. And, and Russia, in this sense, is showing its colors, it looks like. And yes, there's a defensive historical aspect of it. But if they think that by threats, again, this is, deep in the Cold War stuff or late 1930s stuff in rhetoric and demands, this is not the way to do it. And what Moscow, I believe, is doing, the Kremlin, and when I say the Kremlin, I don't mean all Russians. I'm not sure all the Russian population, if they fully understood what was going on, would back this potential road to war. Because they're going to be the bill pillars as well as the Ukrainians and possibly other Europeans if this thing expands. Yeah, we have to all work our way out of it. Brute military force and the threat of it isn't that. And if you think, and why the military? There isn't anything that looks offensive coming out on the ground against Russia in Europe right now. So this is wrong. And they've got to take a deep breath. I'm glad our side and their side are negotiating. We're listening. There's a lot of historical and Cold War baggage there, but nothing out there that should indicate or provoke a major armed operation where the Kremlin may say is an intervention, but what they will really be doing is it'll be aggression. And I don't think that Moscow and the Kremlin want to be perceived as an aggressor nation, which is why everyone is worried about provocations.
But my question is, they did the same to Crimea. So why not the world can or cannot expect that Russia will not do the same as it did with Crimea?
I think that, Professor, and I was in Moscow at the time, I don't think that most of us, including me, it happened so fast, and we didn't fully, we saw the indications, we didn't fully understand what was happening in the beginning. And maybe part of it is we hadn't put our head into the fact, oh my God, they might actually do this, because it was so, if you will, aggressive. Now, and the narrative is there, and you got narrative today. The narrative of 2013 and 2014. You had Maidan going on in Kyiv. But you had a lot of press and rhetoric that the Ukrainians were oppressing the Russian Ukrainians in the East and creating a justification for intervention. Oh, and NATO was going to put naval bases into Crimea. That was what was being played in Russia, and I heard it. And we're saying, no. So what we worry about today is that regarding Ukraine today, and the region is that when you hear discussions about the Ukrainians or other provocateurs that are or Russians trying to create an incident in the Donbass, Moldova, that all of a sudden shows aggression, like occurred before Poland in 1939. Now the Kremlin has its justification. It is now no longer, and it is now intervening and is no longer an aggressor. And they need that narrative and dialogue to justify to the world and to their own people. So this is why I think they have pushed really far and really deep diplomatically and have put themselves in a bit of a cul-de-sac. Let's everybody take a deep breath. Again, I'm one that believes there are ways to find positive, if you will, cooperation with Russia, but this isn't it. Last thing. If the intent also was strategically in making, if you will, the pressure on Ukraine to break up or stress the Western alliance, including independent neutral countries like Sweden and Finland, here the Kremlin has miscalculated, and Europe, yeah, there'll always be issues, but Europe is pretty hardened right now on the Russian position. If the Russians go, yeah, they'll have initial military overmatch. And they may even take their initial objectives, depending how big the mission is. But now they're in a world of hurt. Whole world is screaming at them. They're now international pariahs. They're getting sanctioned in a way they've never been sanctioned before. They're major economic duress. Nord Stream is really gone, and their population starts getting restless. So Russia has made its points, and we are listening, but being firm to our principles. Let's see if there's some middle ground here. Step back and calm the waters. This has gone too far, and it is utterly unnecessary because, again, there was no military threat to Russia from this.
Fair enough. One thing I want to understand, sir, Putin is in power. If we put all together past 3 American presidents' tenure on one side and Putin's tenure on one side, I mean, he is in power for past 25 years. At this stage, a leader starts thinking something beyond, I mean, something which can put his tenure or keep his tenure in the books of history for a longer period. What I mean to say, is there any chance that Putin wants to reunite, if not all the USSR nations, at least few former USSR nations under one umbrella again? I mean, is he seeing any kind of alliance of former USSR nations, either by diplomatic methods or by crushing them?
Yeah. President Vladimir Putin has been in power for 22 years, and really in power, and he has proven to be quite a balancer and quite a he's a canny international and domestic player, and he has had issues that he's had to deal with internally, and clearly up until 2014, life after the crazy 1990s, which is what my book Swimming the Volga is about, he brought some stability and pride and respect, self-respect to the Russians that is something that I think is deep in the Russian soul. He may have been in power too long, though, because I worry that when, he talked about the breakup of the Soviet Union was one of the great historical mistakes and injustices in history. And I think he believes that. And when you have a powerful leader in power for a long time, the foreign policy of that nation starts to become that of what that uber leader thinks, and not necessarily a major policy-making group or the people. It becomes about him. And you saw that he is a strong, autocratic, authoritarian, charismatic leader. We saw those come up in the 1930s and a few post-Cold War. And now I think what he believes is, in large part, what becomes policy. And he sees NATO as a threat. I don't think he worries so much on the ground-to-ground military. I think he worries what NATO and the West, your country too, about the values we have. And we're not perfect, but we are mostly a democratic nation with democratic principles, with freedom of press, and an open market. And I think those are things right now that also threaten him in his own mind. That doesn't mean the Russian people. And that's not the intent of NATO and the West. We're right now trying to stand up for the West, give those countries in between that used to be part of the former Soviet Union an opportunity to be independent nations without interference. And right now it's really, really hard. And it is also hard for Russia, Professor, because since the breakup, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of instability on Russian borders in countries that were part of the Soviet Union. Well, we see that playing in Azerbaijan, Armenia. We just saw it, and it's still playing out with Kazakhstan. We saw it in Belarus, which is now compliant to the Kremlin, and people are worried. I mean, how aggressive is this, that the Russian forces now in Belarus that are going to be exercising, but are now posing a threat to the backside of Kyiv and Dnieper River? That doesn't, if they were trying to calm the situation, that is a move they probably shouldn't do. So there's a lot going on. We in NATO and the West and the nations, and it's not just the West, it's like-minded, mostly nations in the world, have got to find a way that in working and addressing the Russians, be firm and let them come to their own conclusion that this is not, and we are not a threat unless they choose us to be, and there are bigger threats in the world along their vast periphery that are going to be a problem probably in their next generation, and we shouldn't be part of that.
Okay, my question is, I mean, you yourself, and we all know, Putin wants a larger than life image of himself. Number one, is he imagining himself somewhere close to Stalin, Lenin, Khruschev, Brejhnev? I mean, what does he want? What he thinks about himself? Second,
nobody can parse out. Nobody can. I mean, he is his own guy, and he's carved out his own position. If I were to define him, it's almost sort of as a hybrid post-Soviet New Age czar. Okay, it's a combination of a lot of it. Does that work for you?
Yes, correctly. You very correctly put the right card, sir. Secondly, talking about the long-term perspective, will Russia be able to survive with so many fronts open at one go? I mean, Kazakhstan one side, I mean, Ukraine on second side, clashes and differences with NATO on another side, and you said Belarus. So how he will be able to manage all these situations? And secondly, if he will be able to manage these situations, what's your opinion? What it will lead? What it will add in Putin's status, or what will be the future of Putin?
What I say about Russia, a country that, as I say, I have a long history and actually, again, on a personal level, like quite a bit. So this is hard for me. And this is why I am especially just it doesn't have to be this way. Ratnesh, I lost the tone of your question. I'm sorry.
I'm saying, will Russia be able to survive?
Yes, I got it. Here's what I will say. Russia is huge. It is vast, but it is not that big. And meaning it is a gigantic 11 time zone country. It is a superpower, certainly in its resources. It's a nuclear power, the scientific ability of its people, and fine arts. But its population struggles to get to 150 million people, which is about 1/8 the size of your country, or 1/7, 1/8 or 1/9 the size of the People's Republic of China, with whom they have very good relations, but a historically very challenged border. And their border, as I tell Americans, is as long as our border, our huge border with Canada. And that demographics, I mean, 145 million people is a large country, but it is also 1/3 the size of a unified European Union and 40% of the United States in population. So you have all of that in this vast 11 time zone country. 80% of the population is in the Ural Mountains or west, 20% in the other 2/3 of Russia, of which many of those republics and places that are there in former Central Asia were, carved out of the civilizations and hides of this is all out of imperial and Soviet empire. So these borders are going to be eternally restless. And right now you have Russians that are actively militarily in Syria. They've actually managed it very well. Somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 troops, people estimate. They have garrisons in Tajikistan, in Kyrgyzstan. You just saw what happened in Kazakhstan, where they, as leader of the CSTO, though Armenia is in the head, intervened in the Kazakh turmoil. And there's a side of me that actually understands why. And if they actually do pull out, then they executed that mission fairly well from a stability perspective, except the fact that they were propping up a regime that killed a lot of people. So you have that. But the Russians have 3.5 million ethnic Russians in Kazakhstan. They have Baikonur. So the Russians are already there. And I don't think people, well, they're going to occupy. No, it made no sense. So as far as a careful set it and withdraw, if they are, it's good, but the Russians are there already. But when you get into the discussion about China, Ratnesh, the Belt and Road Initiative goes through that area.
Here I want to question. You have raised the question when I want to listen the answer from you. You said Russia and China are sharing a good relation in contemporary time. So, few days back, MI6 boss Richard Moore had released one of its kind public statement in which he has confirmed that Chinese Secret Service has the capability to hit inland against Western interests countries like United States of America, UK, France, Germany. He also said about India that Chinese Secret Service has developed capability to hit inland with the help of their agents spread across countries or by means of biological weapons. So some of the contact, highly placed contact in Communist Party of China, CCP, they wanted to know. And secondly, MI5 said a few days back that Chinese Secret Service is knee-deep in British establishment. So a top contact in Communist Party of China, they wanted to know what Britain government is doing. That's another, what British intelligence will do or will not do is altogether another thing. We will not be knowing what action British intelligence is taking against those political leaders or parliamentarians who has been targeted by Chinese Secret Service agents. But do you also agree with the statement given by Richard Moore that Chinese Secret Service, along with its allies like Russia, have developed capability in recent years to hit inland against Western interests and also against a country like India?
I can't speak in detail on the inner Chinese capabilities to, if you will, whether militarily or politically or via subversion and technology and cyber and AI, the inner workings of my country, the West, your country. You know, even I don't know, except that they are, and I fight hard not to portray China as a future adversary, and it's hard not to because it then shuts my mind. But yeah, there's a lot to be worried about. Let me put it this way. And I think of all the major countries of the world, China thinks big in a way. My country doesn't anymore, that Russia doesn't think anymore. And they think globally. And I think that part of it is that there is a grievance narrative, restoring history, making up for lost time. They are like other countries in the 1930s. They're resource dependent for especially energy and fuels and all of that, which means they want to ideally buy peacefully, acquire energy, oil, natural gas, strategic minerals. They don't want to do it by war, but they need it to feed, if you will, their economy, their huge population. And that is in part, I think, what the Belt and Road Initiative is all about. That and the Polar Silk Road that we're hearing about. They don't want to go to war. They don't want that, but they want their way, and they're going to get their way. And we're seeing that all over the world with fairly aggressive Chinese economic interests that are often backed up by the Communist Party and the embassies and all of that. So yeah, so when the Chinese are working the Belt and Road Initiative through the lands of the independent lands of the former Southern Soviet Union, that Central Asia and the Caspian, there's a lot to be concerned about. If it's peaceful and it is not grandiose in its concept and end state, then okay. but it is pretty grandiose. Russians are on board. The Russians are on board with the Belt and Road Initiative, and China is a new polar nation. But that doesn't mean they like it. And I think they have no choice but to go along with it, because out in the Far East, China has demographic and geographic overmatch. And so I think Russia has to play very, very carefully with the Chinese. So from a near-term Russian foreign policy perspective, it's prudent. They're focused on the West, China's focused on the East and the Pacific, and they cover each other's diplomatic and, if need be, military flanks. Again, they are real partners. I mean, they are real partners, and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, up until COVID, were seeing each other several times a year. They'll meet again in February. It's a real relationship. And you know about the Russian and Chinese increasing, I'll just say, military interaction. But I think that I'll stop on this with Russia. If you're playing a long game in Moscow, this might be a dangerous game with China, because you don't know what's going to happen long term, and by weakening the West and putting all their resources to stand up in their mind to the West, their back door strategically in the South and the Far East is open. Maybe not in this generation, not now, but maybe in the next generation. So we're just going to have to see.
Mm-hmm. That's actually the whole game which is going on on this side of war. Not only USA, but India should also be worried about it. Thank you very much, sir, for your precious time. And I'm really sorry. I send my apologies that the interview was slightly delayed. But thank you again very much for your valuable time. I will come to you again. I will keep an eye on the development, so you will be keeping an eye on the development on Ukrainian border. I will come to you again, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Again, in my country, we got to find a way with the Russians, and confrontation isn't the way, because there are too many other problems, including in Asia, that we all need to be working on. Professor, thank you very much. And yes, thank you also for mentioning my book, Swimming the Volga. Cheers and good evening, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I will come to you again. Thank you.